Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kevin Ring, president of FAMM. Welcome to another edition of our Heart to Heart series. Today's going to be a fun conversation with friends about a topic that a lot of people are asking about, which is what can we expect and hope for from the new Biden-Harris administration in Washington? And I think we have three people here who are as equipped to answer that question as anyone. And so I'm really excited to have them. I'm just going to briefly introduce them. Their titles are too long, so I can't do all of them. But Nkechi Taifa she runs her own group now, the Taifa Group, but she's a longtime criminal justice reformer and consultant in Washington, D.C., and she knows more than most people about all of these issues we're going to discuss. Udi Ofer from the ACLU, and Heather Rice-Minus from Prison Fellowship. So, as I said, we're going to keep it casual and hope this is informative to people who are really trying to get a sense of what to expect. The Biden administration is only a week old. We're all chomping at the bit for them to take action on critical issues facing our federal and state prison system. And so I just want to jump in with a question that a lot of people were asking during the campaign, which is, how high should we set expectations? We know that Joe Biden in his past life took credit for authoring most of the scaffolding that built mass incarceration at the federal level. And I don't just mean the 94 crime bill that people talk about, the 86, 88 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, where we got a lot of the federal mandatory minimum sentences. And now, things have changed. I was on the other side of these issues 30 years ago too. And so how much can we expect in terms of, has he grown and changed? We know what he's proposed, but we also have a record. And so I want to start with you, Nkechi. I'm going to talk later about, exactly your goals and specific action items that you want to see done. But just talk about your sense coming into this about whether this is somebody who can bring transformation to our justice system. Are you optimistic, pessimistic? What are you thinking?
So thank you so much, first of all, Kevin, for inviting me, and welcome to the other panelists as well. But first of all, I just want to say that I also convened the Justice Roundtable, which is a coalition of over 100 organizations working in Washington, primarily on federal criminal justice policy issues. And I was around back in the early 90s with those crime bills. It was a crime bill every single year. And yes, Joe Biden was at the forefront of it. And at that time, Udi, I was working at the American Civil Liberties Union, which was a primary organization that was fighting against those crime bills, fighting against the more and more mandatory minimums, fighting against the federal death penalty expansion, fighting against the evisceration of the exclusionary rule and the gutting of habeas corpus and the trying of 13-year-olds as adults and the elimination of Pell Grants and the refusal to address the crack powder disparity. So I must say that now we're talking about, I can't do my math, 30, whatever, some years, later, I am optimistic despite all of that. Why? I am optimistic because my main philosophy is that people deserve a second chance. Okay, people deserve a second look. But the time is different now than it was then. Then there was no difference, trust me, between Democrats and Republicans when you dealt with criminal justice issues. I watched candidate Bill Clinton leave the campaign trail to oversee the execution of a mentally challenged person in Arkansas. So these were some trying, times. Why am I optimistic today? I am optimistic because the society, the country has changed since then. There was always police abuse. There were always police killings, but it wasn't always in your face. And on the 10 o'clock news, there was no cell phones during that time. There was no internet and all of that that's there today. I think the people are going to ensure accountability. The people are going to ensure boldness of action. And I'm part of that insurance policy as well.
Well said. I agree with a lot of that. Udi, what's your take?
Yeah. So I'm cautiously optimistic. And the reason is, I think we're in a Lyndon Johnson moment right now. If I'm going to use like a historical precedent, Johnson was not a civil rights leader by any stretch of the imagination. He had a terrible track record on the issue, but he realized what moment we were in, and he was a good politician. So he seized that moment. And by the way, right, his record is complicated, right? There were a lot of good things that came out, but as Elizabeth Hinton and other scholars have documented, also you could argue that a lot of the war on crime started with Lyndon Johnson. But look, I think we have to be fully aware of what we're dealing with, and it's absolutely true that Biden is one of the architects of mass incarceration in the United States. It's where the Democratic Party was, and he pushed the Democratic Party in that direction. But in some ways, you could argue maybe he feels even more of a responsibility to correct the injustices of the past, recognizing his own role in it. And that's the line that we're going to have to walk, right, as advocates. We have to remind him of his role, but also create the space for him to do things differently and to fix those injustices of the past. And the last thing I'll say, why I'm fairly optimistic, and why I do think, or cautiously optimistic, and why I do think it's similar to a Lyndon Johnson moment. We had the leadership of Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s that led to the war on poverty, the civil rights acts, and so forth. The Black Lives Matter movement in the United States has already changed the United States, and it has allowed for this moment to happen, which is one of the reasons I'm so perplexed at the Democratic Party right now for picking a battle with the Black Lives Matter movement around the whole police defund question, regardless of what you think of that as a strategy. But I also believe the BLM, the leadership there, the grassroots organizations behind it led us to this moment, in addition to these amazing right-left coalitions that have been created. And now it's our job as the advocates, as the movement, to make sure that audacious things happen over the next 4 years.
Well said. Yeah, and I noted that I think you're right, that after last summer, when we had the killings of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, you saw polls show that 60-something% of Americans believe there was racial discrimination in the justice system. Now, we all would have thought that would have been higher, but it's higher than it's been. So there has been movement, and we've even seen change in the drug laws. We're seeing drug legalization efforts. So there's definitely, as Nkechi was saying, it's just a different time today. Heather, you come at this maybe from a different perspective. I don't know. What are your thoughts? I mean, all of us had, to a certain extent, we work with every administration that comes. People worked with the Trump administration on First Step Act because the people inside prison really don't care who signs their commutations and signs their bills. They just need relief. So we're in this position of working with everybody. And how do you look at working with the Biden administration in the next 4 years?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the comments that have been said. I like what you said, Nkechi, about, we're about second chances, right? And from Prison Fellowship's perspective, we're about redemption. And I think that we saw, even on the campaign trail, Biden laying out how he recognized that things he played a role in the past were mistakes, and that, we do know better now in terms of what the data has borne out and the impact that this has had, particularly on communities of color. And so we will, at Prison Fellowship, as the nation's largest Christian nonprofit serving people in prison and also advocating for justice reform, we want to be true to that message of redemption and give an opportunity to work with anyone who has shared goals. And so, we're hopeful that there will be some great opportunities. I think the big question to me is, what is the state of bipartisanship in criminal justice moving forward? I think, despite where Congress has landed, there will still need to be room for folks to work across the aisle together. And so that's kind of the big lingering question to me.
Yeah, I think those are good questions. And let's start. I mean, so we're all cautiously optimistic. So Udi, today, ACLU, I don't think it was the launch. You guys have been talking about clemency for a long time, as a lot of us have. You have a full page ad in the Washington Post calling on the Biden administration to grant mass clemency. Do you want to talk about that effort?
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you. It is the launch of our federal effort. I mean, for about a year, we've had an effort in the states to get governors to use their clemency power to get people out of prison. But today we launched our federal effort. And, this is a campaign that actually I'm really passionate about, and I'm really proud of what happened today. So for folks who haven't seen it, we took out a full page ad in the Washington Post that is calling on the Biden administration to commute the sentences of 25,000 people. And the headline is, 25,000 ways to redeem the soul of America. And I think that's an appropriate headline. We are asking the Biden administration to reimagine the whole role of clemency. I think there's really good conversation happening right now that I'm not looking to take away from, but is a bit of a different conversation than we're looking for about cleaning up the clemency process, right? President Trump, politicized it in a way that I think, led to a lot of criticism. And there's no question that we need to clean it up, take it out of the DOJ, put it in the White House. But that's not really the conversation we're trying to have. We want presidents and governors, but President Biden, to start looking at clemency as a way to fix injustices of the past. We don't want him to look at it in a way where he's waiting for that perfect applicant, that perfect person that doesn't really exist, to apply for clemency and get it. We think that's the wrong way to approach this. The way we want the administration to think about this is to think of a category of people or category of offenses that do not belong in prison. So whether it's someone who's elderly, whether it's someone who's in for drugs, whether it's someone who's in for a law that has since been changed, and if they were sentenced today, they would no longer be incarcerated, whether it's someone who has a chronic illness that makes them vulnerable, in particular to COVID-19, to make a decision around a category of people or offenses, and then to say, I'm going to use my executive authority to let them out. And what that should create then is a presumption of release, right? That they will be presumed that this person is going to be released through the use of executive clemency. And maybe that presumption could be overcome, and there'll be a lot of paper filing around that. But that's what we're looking Biden to do. The categories that we send, the elderly, the sick, the people in for old statutes, right there captures tens of thousands of people. So we actually think our ask of 25,000, which will be unprecedented in American history, is actually not that much. But we put out that ad today. We also have a whole paid media strategy, earned media strategy. We're not going away on this issue. This is going to be the drumbeat that we keep beating for the next 4 years. And we're hoping that the White House will listen to us.
I want to co-sign something you said, because we may be the only people saying this. There is so much talk about process around clemency. And it really, to me, is backwards. I mean, the political will has to come first. If you set up a great clemency process, you can move it out of the Justice Department. You can do a lot of things, but if there's no political will to actually grant them, it's useless. And conversely, if you left OPA, the Office of Pardon Attorney, in the Justice Department, but had a president who said, I want on my desk at the end of every month 1,000 petitions, they could do that.
Exactly.
So I mean, we're just focusing so much on and leaving out the fact that presidents and governors don't mind a convoluted process that makes them not on the hook. I mean, so I just think it's different. I think there's too much focus on the process, not enough on building support for doing it. I'm glad you guys are doing it for that reason. Nkechi, you look like you want to jump in.
Yeah, let me just jump in there, because I think it's both and, not either or.
Right.
Both and. You have a situation where the very people who put persons in prison in the first place, who convicted them, passing judgment or having an overdue influence on whether they're going to get out. That's like asking the fox to guard over the chicken coop. Something's not quite right with that. And the problems didn't just start with the Trump administration either, because of the process. There were many people who were denied clemency because of the influence, overdue influence of the overseers, of the people who put them in prison in the right place. So I say both and I will say it's all about the times also, because 10 years ago, I was talking about categories for clemency, and I was left out of the room by my own progressive colleagues. So, I mean, I'm just saying things take that. But see, now, thankfully, the political environment is such that, yeah, it just makes sense. And Udi, I'm not sure, God, I just don't remember the numbers, but during the Ford administration, I don't want to use the term mass clemency, so we'll say categorical clemencies were granted to Vietnam era folk who resisted the draft. And that was a whole swath. I think it was like 50-something thousand. I'm not even going. So I wouldn't even say 25,000. I think that there's precedent for more and more. And I'm thankful that the ACLU has put this top tier on its agenda, because this is an issue whose time has come. But it's both and, not either or, in my opinion.
I totally agree with that. It's just, with the will, you could do it no matter what the process is. No process can fix somebody not doing it. So I just think I like the way the ACLU is framing this, because if it was moved out of the Justice Department and President Biden got 25,000 recommendations, he still has to grant them. And I mean, one thing President Trump showed is, if you want to do them, you can do them. He bypassed the Justice Department. Heather, why don't you jump in? You can talk about clemency, or you can talk about whatever you guys are hoping for and pushing for.
Sure. Certainly know that this has been an issue that has been a long time coming, and would love to pass the mic to Nkechi too on this one. But one issue we're really focusing on, and today with FAMM, had the opportunity to publicly share our prioritization of reducing the disparity between how crack and powder cocaine are punished. And while this is something that's been talked about for a long time, obviously disparity was brought down through the Fair Sentencing Act that all of us worked on back in 2010. There's still a continuing disparity. And I think that with where we are in this country, and to Nkechi's point of people willing to hold folks accountable now, and a greater recognition that there is racial discrimination that happens within the justice system, that this could be a low-hanging fruit opportunity for the administration to move quickly on. And I think would also help set the course to, if it can be done in a way that is bipartisan, could set the stage for greater bipartisan discussion on other issues that have been harder to conquer, like policing reform. Nkechi, would you like to add to that?
Well, I agree with what you have said, Heather. And I know I am a 100% believer in terms of bipartisanship. We would never have passed the Fair Sentencing Act and without bipartisan. And I'm not just talking about in Congress, I'm talking about amongst the organizations. We would never have passed the Second Chance Reentry Bill in 2008 had there not been a bipartisan. We would never have gotten sentencing provisions, the retroactivity of the crack powder in the First Step Act if there had not been bipartisan, working together. So I 100% agree with you there. With respect to the Justice Roundtable, we produced in November a transition report for the new administration in the 117th Congress, dealing with a lot of different areas, whether it's sentencing, reentry, clemency, drug policy, reform, pretrial in courts, bail, and the like. And we're hoping that with bipartisan engagement of not only members of Congress and the Senate, but amongst the organizations, that we'll be able to get some of those things passed.
Yeah, and Udi, I think the crack disparity is another good category of cases. If Congress were not to act, President Biden could commute sentences of those who are serving excessive sentences because of the 18-to-1 ratio. So that might be another category.
Yeah, no, and it's one of the, drug sentences is one of the categories, but specifically, the crack, cocaine disparity. But your point, and I wanted to for a second about other parties, but your point back to clemency, it is 100% a political decision. The paper pushing does not matter, with all due respect, right? And look, Cynthia Roseberry is my deputy director, and she led the Obama administration's clemency project. Her whole job was, get thousands of lawyers to file petitions. So and of course we believe in that, but that's not where we win the boldness. That's where we get from 2,000 commutations to 2,300 commutations, so 2,500 commutations. I'm not minimizing them, but we don't end mass incarceration that way. We end mass incarceration when political decisions are made to end mass incarceration. And the reason we started this campaign with governors, although now we've elevated to presidents, because we were getting sick and tired of governors blaming legislatures for the failure of efforts to end mass incarceration. We would have these governors who would tweet out Black Lives Matter, who would say, I'm with you, but I can't get it through my Republican Senate. Meanwhile, we're saying, okay, well, in your state, you have sole authority over clemency. Why don't you use your own authority to think audaciously? And we're in that moment then. And going back to Nkechi's point about precedent, so President Ford pardoned, 13,000 people who were, it's fine, but the point is it was a lot of people. But Thomas Jefferson pardoned everyone who was convicted under the Sedition Act. President Lincoln pardoned members of the Dakota tribe, 264 members of the Dakota tribe who were sentenced to death for attacking a white American. I mean, there is precedent in American history, literally going back to Thomas Jefferson, of political decisions made to redress injustices of the past.
Udi, we may be making news. Is the ACLU recommending today that the president pardon people who might have committed sedition in the
I was hoping that one would just slide under.
Well, I mean, whatever political decisions the president wants to make. On the other efforts that I think we're hoping are going to see light of day under Biden and also the 117th Congress, obviously we're really excited for the Second Step Act and whatever iteration that looks like. The Second Look Act, I see a lot of the questions in the feed have to do with people who have been in for a long time, deserve to get out. That is exactly what the Second Look Act does. I think Senator Booker's Equal Act, which was just introduced today on crack cocaine, is absolutely important. I also think marijuana reform. Look, marijuana is not a main driver of incarceration in federal prison, but it does begin to chip away at the war on drugs, which is a major driver of incarceration. And we now have Senator Schumer saying a couple of times that he's committed to doing something on marijuana in the Senate. I think it could pass a filibuster, marijuana. So I'm cautiously optimistic that also we're going to see some good legislation done.
Well, I want to ask you all about some of the other priorities that a lot of our family members raised with us, which is, I mean, almost the top one we get is first step retroactivity. A lot of people serving those 924C gun cases, 3-strike cases. Law was changed, wasn't made retroactive. That's always, in our view, such an immoral thing to do. I know it's done for political reasons, but there's no way to justify somebody serving a longer sentence just because of when they committed their crime. Heather, I mean, is that something you guys are looking to push to, is first step retroactivity?
Absolutely. Would love to be able to see some more sentencing reforms happen and to narrow in on retroactivity for First Step Act, and know that there's appetite from some of the First Step Act sponsors. So we are eager to pursue that. And I think another thing that's still super timely, we haven't really talked about much yet, is just the impact of COVID-19 on the federal prison system and the opportunity for continuing to expedite releases for those who don't need to be held for public safety reasons in prison and who have vulnerability. We're still just at the outset of the vaccination rollout, and there's still a lot of people who are at risk and who are suffering behind the walls. And not only that, I mean, of course, there's a life and death of folks that we talk about, but just the day-to-day for people in prison. We think a lot about the lack of programming and visitation and all of that has come to a halt, which we're acutely aware of here, just because so much of our staff does normally go into prison every single day and get the opportunity to bring hope to people inside. And so I think we've got to continue to push for folks to be creative in terms of providing opportunities for programming, virtual learning, all of that. Inside the walls, because we know what it's like to quarantine out here in the community, but it's a much different experience for those who are inside the walls.
I'm going to come to Nkechi, but I want to just make a speech Udi heard me make yesterday, which is the one thing that we're trying to impress upon lawmakers is the urgency of the situation. That people have been locked down for 10 months. They don't have visits. They barely get out now for showers or phone calls. The mental health strain has gotten out of control. Not only for the families who then don't hear from their loved ones, but for the people inside who were not sentenced to solitary confinement, but that's what the quarantine has become. And it is horrific, and it's not close to ending, especially if they don't get the vaccine soon. So all of these remedies, all these things that we have to do, I mean, what we're trying to tell Congress is we don't have any time to wait. And I agree with you, Heather, COVID allows for some emergency action that they should take. I was glad Congress in the CARES Act gave the Attorney General more home confinement authority. And then we saw President Trump's Justice Department on its way out the door say, actually, those people need to go back when the pandemic ends. And I assume we can get that fixed, but that caused a lot of unnecessary heartburn for people on the outside. Nkechi, all of these things, I know you are very familiar with Second Look, and I do think that's a lot of what people are looking for is how do people serving these excessive sentences get a second chance? And I think clemency is one way. Compassionate release is being used in a broader way than I think we originally thought it might be, and we're starting to see some people get out who had life sentences or 924C cases, right? And the Second Look Act that Senator Booker introduced, and we've seen in DC and other states being introduced. One question we get a lot is, why isn't there federal parole? And is there any chance of bringing parole back? And I really don't know how to answer that because I don't see that as politically viable right now. And that's why we're trying to work on some of these other approaches. But can you enlighten us on that?
Well, parole was, as we know, was eliminated back in the 80s. And again, it dealt with this whole atmosphere, this whole tough on crime atmosphere that both Democrats and Republicans were were proponents of, and the thinking was that people should not get out early. They should spend their whole time, et cetera. And then you had the Willie Horton, who was out on a furlough, one person amongst thousands upon thousands who never had any issues, coming out, but that ended up changing everything. So when Senator Booker comes with the Second Look Act, it really is an attempt to do something similar to parole, but without using the P word, because that was totally a non-starter word. At least it had been for quite a number of decades, and it served to look at who the person is today, okay, as opposed to all of the emphasis being on who they were at the time of the crime of conviction, and looking at age. And looking at how much time they'd already, spent in prison and the like. So it was a very welcome and refreshing bill that was introduced, and I think is about to be reintroduced as part of the Next Steps Act, which really would serve to give some people a little bit of hope. Someone like a client that I had who was sentenced to life without parole. You have a life without parole sentence. You didn't get the death penalty, but that is essentially what it ends up being. But your life is totally and completely changed around. You've already spent 20, 30, 40 or whatever years, in prison. You're elderly, you mentor other your prisoners. You don't, all of those things. So he incorporated a lot of that within the Second Look Act. And again, some of these things can be cured with clemency, but we need a legislative process as well. And Second Look serves to accommodate that. Yeah,
I think that's right. I think we need every system actor to have a way to revisit long sentences. And the executive can do through clemency. Congress could give the judges the power to do this. Udi, what are you thinking about? The federal system is the biggest prison system, but most people are in state prison. And what can the federal government do to incentivize or encourage similar decarcerative efforts at the state level?
No, that's a great question and something we think a lot about. But I want to keep kind of hammering home one point. And look, I'm a political strategist. That's what I do mostly, in addition to being a lawyer. And I do think everything boils down to politics, and that in some ways the law is irrelevant. Because if there's a political desire to do something, it will happen no matter what the law is. So we've had that in the context of clemency, right? Whether it's an easy process or a hard process, if a president wants to commute sentences, he will commute those sentences. I think the same way on this issue, right? We are trying, and I think we've been greatly succeeded, to change the political incentives for governors and for state lawmakers so that they get rewarded politically when they are good at ending mass incarceration. So what does that mean? That means they get to rise up in their political ranks. They get to go from being a state House member to being a congressperson. For President Biden, for Vice President Harris, for the Justice Department, first of all, to just talk about this, to create that political climate, to bring together state actors, to invite them to the White House when they do innovative things, right there will push a lot. But the other way to do this, obviously, and we all know this very well as federal lobbyists, is to use the federal purse, right, to incentivize states to do things. So there's a lot of ideas out there, everything from the Reverse Mass Incarceration Act to executive orders that Biden could issue, although it's a bit complicated given some of the legal challenges against President Trump for using his executive level authority to force states to do things. But through appropriations power, through grant making, there's a ton that the federal government can do to incentivize states to pass good laws. But by the way, I'll say this, there's a ton the states are doing much further than what the federal government is doing. On Wednesday, the ACLU is going to be in a red state. I'm not going to say which one because I don't want to spoil the event. We're going to be in a red state with a red lawmaker introducing audacious legislation that would help thousands of people who are currently incarcerated because of parole-related issues, and specifically technical revocations of parole, which is a huge driver of incarceration in the United States. It's in a red state. We have other, I know this is not a mass incarceration issue per se, but there's a great movement right now in Wyoming to repeal the death penalty. And it's a red state led by red lawmakers to legislatively repeal the death penalty. And we may have Wyoming be the first state in the country this year to repeal, first red state in the country this year to repeal the death penalty legislatively. And I do see it as connected to mass incarceration because I think as long as we allow the government to kill people, we then allow the government to incarcerate people for life without parole, or for 50 years or 40 years or 30 years. So we got to lower the benchmark. So there's a ton the federal government can do, but there's also a ton that the federal government can learn from the states and how to do this work in a bipartisan, creative way.
Heather, I want to ask you to go from sort of the bigger picture back to the immediate and the emergency. New administration coming in. We have COVID, obviously, throughout the federal and state prisons. There was some authority granted to the Attorney General to expand home confinement. Unfortunately, the Justice Department still keeps fighting a lot of the compassionate releases, that they could be bringing those motions instead of fighting the people who are bringing them. We could get more of that. What do you hope that if he's confirmed, Attorney General Garland, Merrick Garland's been nominated, his questionnaire is now before the Senate, he'll have his hearing and get going. What are things that, you're from people inside that you're hearing immediate steps that you'd like to see taken to address the emergency?
Yeah. So, on the compassionate release side, and just kudos to you, Kevin, and all those who have been working on really expediting those cases and making sure that they have representation needed. But I think, there's a great opportunity to just say, these cases should just be going direct, right? And not have this BOP review. There's opportunities like that they could do. I think I saw a question from someone in the audience about, could there be a memo written about lessening, all of the requirements for those who qualify for home confinement. And so, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to sort of expand and continue to expedite consideration of those who are most vulnerable and who pose the least public safety risk. I also think there's, a need to think about programming. And so one thing we've been talking to offices about is a lot of state systems have tablets. The federal prison system could be issuing tablets for use of programming, as an example, and could easily pull some of the budget to make that possible. What are some of the creative ways that we can make sure that people aren't sitting idle? I think could be important immediate changes that could be made. Additionally, there's the question of the First Step Act and earned time credit. And a lot of states and the federal system are struggling to figure out during COVID-19, when we don't have people participating in programming in the way we had imagined. How can people earn time credits? And so I think that there's some opportunity to get creative, to look at the spirit of the law, and to provide some opportunities for folks to earn those time credits even during COVID-19 as well.
Yeah, I think in the rest of society, we're trying to find all the ways where what we're doing with COVID might be translatable to when COVID goes, right? So like, you're seeing people get takeout alcohol at restaurants, and they're saying, why couldn't we do this always, right? I mean, we're doing this now. Like, what else were we doing that we didn't have to do? And one thing I see at the federal system, at least, is, because I think governors have been largely cowardly about using their clemency authority to get people out. At the federal level, though, with the expanded home confinement, we have 7,000 people right now are currently in home confinement for extended periods of time that they wouldn't have got before, because they would have just been able to spend those last few months. And we're not going to see any public safety risk because of that. And so it begs the question, why can't we do that? Why can't that be the norm? Why can't we let people get out to the community sooner? Why can't we use compassionate release more often for people who don't pose a public safety threat, but who have served enough time? So I think there's lessons we can learn from COVID. And if we make sure that we talk about the stories and those successes, hopefully those things will last even when this crisis ends. What do you think, Nkechi?
I agree 100%. And I'm really hopeful that OLC, Office of Legal Counsel memo that is mandating that people who are out on home confinement have to go back once the pandemic is concluded is overturned. I will say right now, within the first 100 days, there could be an executive order that grants whatever it is, so that changes that, so that doesn't have to happen, or that's part of the category of clemency requests, right, demands, or whatever that we make. But that is one sure way, because they've been in the community now for a year and a half, or, since COVID. Have not been any issues. At least I haven't seen any big time news splashes, crazy stuff, out there. And I think that the public just really needs to be educated to the fact that this country just over incarcerates too many people for too long of a period of time. And it actually is an outlier amongst the other countries there in the world. So yes, I'm hoping that the silver lining, if we want to call it, in this pandemic, is that things that are beginning to loosen up do in fact become normalized, and that we build on things from there.
Yeah, Udi, do you want to pick? Oh, go ahead, Heather.
I want to be a bit more pessimistic too, but go ahead, Heather.
I'll let you be pessimistic. But I just also wanted to add, in terms of lessons learned, I think, states are also learning these lessons, right? And we've had some states like Kentucky that have used executive power to make sure people are coming home faster. And but I think there's a lot of states who are trying to do the right thing. And with the CARES Act, there was all these resources available to folks, but, we're talking to lawmakers in states, and those resources aren't reaching them, those who are trying to do the right thing, of sort of evaluating who they can safely release, how they can lessen the use of the criminal justice system in a safe way. And so I still think there's a lot of need for focus on emergency resources to state actors and correction systems who are trying to move these kinds of policy things forward. And hopefully those will, like you said, Kevin, be things that stick. But, Udi, tell us how that.
We're not afraid, Udi.
I kind of feel the need to just express this, even though I may not necessarily agree with it. And I feel like, Kevin, this is usually the role that you play. But I think I'm also been a bit worried by some of the narrative from the COVID, time. I mean, we are seeing certain tabloids, certain media, certain politicians actually make a linkage between an increase in the crime rate in 2020, which did happen, to kind of looser policies around jail incarceration, prison, police practices, blaming it on the Black Lives Matter protests. I don't agree with those linkages. I don't agree with the science behind it, but politically, which again is kind of where I live and breathe, I do worry about it. I worry about it genuinely. And I don't think we win that battle by having better reports that actually say, well, that is not true. It's all about the politics.
So I want to talk. I want to talk about that. I think I want to have a whole show about the politics of this spike in crime, because I think we do have to deal with it. And I think we need a better narrative than, well, it's complicated. Because the other side has a narrative, which is you've run down the police, you've let people out on bail, and so we have a narrative. It may be completely wrong, but they're certain of it. And it sounds plausible, whereas we say we have no idea. And so I think that's hard. But I want to shelve that for a second, because somebody asked about, well, how do we make these things happen? And I'm 100% with you, Udi, on the fact that it's just politics. It's just lawmakers who thought that the best thing they could do was be tough on crime need to know that that's not what their constituents want. And I mean constituents. I mean the people who are in your district who vote for you. It doesn't matter that you have a favorite congressman 3 states over. You're not their constituent. They're not interested unless they're running for president. You have to have support in all of these different jurisdictions. And so I just want to give people, a minute or two each to talk about how they can either plug into your efforts or just your best political advice for getting involved and becoming active so that we change the politics, because that is it. Politicians in a democracy are going to do what the people demand that they do. They think they're doing that now. It's our job to convince them they're not. So how do they get involved? Udi, you want to start with that now that...
Yeah, to me, this is the biggest transformation that's been happening at the ACLU that I'm really proud of. Look, I've been a part of the ACLU for 17 years. I created the first advocacy department and ACLU affiliate in New York. And then when I came onto the national office, we changed the whole way that the national office operates in terms of this, right? In terms of thinking politically and how to mobilize what I think was in many ways a sleeping giant, and that is the card-carrying member of the ACLU. Right? Historically, people thought of us as just a legal organization of a bunch of, smart attorneys who file litigation. And we still are, and we always will be, but we also have millions of supporters. And if anyone who wants to get involved, it is simple. You sign up for what we call our People Power List. So this is our organizing unit of super activists where we get you tapped into whatever is the local issue that our ACLU affiliates are working on, but they also tap you into our national work. And on clemency, which we've made a big priority, we're also going to make the Second Step Act a big priority, or Second Look, whatever iteration it ends up taking. Those are going to be priorities. We're going to tap you into the movement. So sign up on aclu.org on our People Power List, and you will learn how to lobby your local lawmaker, how to show up to DC when we're allowed to go to DC again, and how to act locally, because Kevin is absolutely right. All politics are local. Yes, the New York and DC influencers, they matter. I don't think they don't matter. There is like a political class that matters. But at the end of the day, and particularly for those swing votes that matter so much, it is about local politics. And we need to change the political incentives on the ground. Yes, we need to have good arguments. And I'm not saying that's not important. Narrative is important. But at the end of the day, it's about showing up. It's about showing numbers. It's about, making a politician feel like they will win the next election, or they will win a bigger election if they vote this way. That's, at the end of the day, that's all that matters.
Heather, I want to come to you because this goes back a little bit, in my view, to your bipartisanship point, because in a state like Pennsylvania, where we've been active on some issues, if the vote were just taken from representatives from Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, we'd win. Mm-hmm. But, as they say, there's Alabama in between those two. And so we have to, and the Republicans control the majority in Pennsylvania. So we need bipartisanship, not only to win, but to sustain these things. Because if they become partisan, they'll get reversed when the partisan wind shifts. So we want these things to have bipartisan support. What are you guys doing? How are you trying to get people involved who may be unlikely supporters or not, people they would think are social justice warriors, but who care and want to vote on their faith?
Right. One of the reasons I wanted to come to work at Prison Fellowship was I had an epiphany that I wasn't evangelical. I didn't even know what the word really meant. And then I recognized I was one. And I recognized that a lot of the lawmakers who were holding up the justice reforms I was working on were my kin in that way. And so I just thought, how great would it be to work for an organization founded by the late Chuck Colson, a man who, many social conservatives and Christians and evangelicals have a lot of respect for, and read his books, know his history, and to be able to have some influence along those lines. And so, I absolutely agree that, that there is power in constituents. And I'm really proud of the way Prison Fellowship has expanded our role in helping to mobilize Christians in particular to step up to the plate and talk about how our values actually do dictate a more restorative approach to justice, and that we want our lawmakers to have that reflect in the way that they pass their laws. And so a couple of things I'll share. Our first education tool that we've put out several years ago that now has reached over 70,000 people nationwide is called Outrageous Justice. It's a small group curriculum guide authored by myself and some of my colleagues. And it's got 6 videos and discussion guides for you to talk about in your church community. And we actually host online groups that you can sign up for and join. So you go to prisonfellowship.org/outrageousjustice. We will send you a free copy and send your whole group a free copy if you're interested. So that's a great educational tool. The next step is to take action. We have an advocate network. And so you can go to prisonfellowship.org, click on Get Involved and Justice Action Center. You can take action on a petition, get on our list. And then if you want to take it a step further, we also have a Justice Ambassador program where we actually train and equip people on how do you host events in your community, in your church, write letters to the editor, and how you meet with your lawmakers and have a persuasive meeting where you talk about how your values connect to these justice reforms. And so we've got hundreds of folks who have stepped up across the country, particularly people who have a loved one who's incarcerated or have formerly incarcerated themselves, who just have been able to leverage their stories. And that's really been the ticket for us to oftentimes see people co-sponsor bills or vote the right way, is when they hear from that constituent, in addition to hearing from our professional policy staff as well.
All right, Nkechi, this is the shameless plug portion of the show.
All right. Okay. So first of all, I loved it when Heather was saying outrageous justice. That sounds like something I would say. That sounds like one of my things. I like that. So the Justice Roundtable, believe it or not, has been around for almost 20 years. And it came around at a time when there was not the plethora of criminal justice reform organizations that you see dotting the landscape today, very well-funded organizations and all like that. Justice Roundtable was none of that. But it was a vehicle for people who were interested in doing the work to bring to work together. It's made up of organizations who are already doing work. The ACLU was one of the first groups that was part of the Justice Roundtable. I remember during our first meeting, there was a young woman sitting in the back, a mousy looking new lawyer who was deployed to a little town in Texas called Tulia to investigate abuses dealing with the war on drugs. And her name was Vanita Gupta. And now she's in the Department of Justice. She was under the Obama administration as well. So we've been around a while and have been a part of the shaping of many people's careers. We work primarily through working groups, issue-specific working groups, where people will come together to focus on that particular issue and help to really have changed policies. We also have a quarterly assembly where just anyone can come together, and we have a feature that's part of that assembly, and then the working groups can share information amongst the whole roundtable with everyone else. And as I said, that during each but every 4 years, we produce a transition report. Our latest one is called, Transformative Justice Recommendations for the New Administration, 117th Congress. We have a very, very modest website. We don't have no money, y'all. It's not like ACLU and FAMM and Prison Fellowship and all like that. We're not an organization that has dues or grants or anything along those lines. But we have a very, very modest website, justiceroundtable.org, where you can find our transition document and news information, opportunities, events, all of those things, as well. So that's Justice Roundtable.
Yeah.
For almost
thing that I'm embarrassed that I didn't say, that ways people could get involved. Look, one of our biggest opponents in criminal justice reform, no matter what state you live in, are district attorneys, or DAs. And for that reason, the ACLU has invested a lot of resources, and other great organizations out there too doing it, in changing who your local DA is. Because they could unilaterally, also decarcerate their jails without a single change of law, but they could also reduce the political opposition that we face in state houses in particular. Very few people vote in local DA races. So all we need are a group of 10 people in every jurisdiction who are taking up the cause of making sure that their local DA is someone who believes in ending mass incarceration. You can change the results of that race. They're usually won during primaries. Many are off-year elections, like this year in Virginia or New York, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
This is one of the best ways you could get involved. You could do it through us. You could do it through Color of Change, Real Justice PAC. There's a lot of great organizations out there. But get involved in your local DA race, because that change will not only affect your jurisdiction, but also your state jurisdiction and also the national politics of this issue.
I'm going to just make it easy for people. Text chances to 21333 to get involved with FAMM, to push. Oh, look at I haven't even got a graphic. To get involved. I will say this, everybody has a role to play in this movement. And for FAMM, what we've really tried to do is elevate the voices of the family members of those incarcerated. There are other groups that focus on directly impacted people who have come home, and a lot of those people work with us. They're on our board. I'm formerly incarcerated. But the family members have a really incredible message, because they didn't do anything wrong. And they serve the time with their loved ones, and their families are disrupted. And that repeats a cycle of poverty, of pain that we want to break. And so when people have joined FAMM, they come to our closed Facebook group or they come to our events, a lot of times people say, I can finally talk about this thing that's happening to me that I can't talk to anybody else about, even sometimes their own family members. So I just think there's a lot of support and comfort you get being around people who are going through the same situation. And as we know, that's more and more Americans have been impacted by the justice system. So I think we're all in agreement, violent agreement, to get involved. I want to echo Udi's point about district attorney races. We're working to repeal mandatory minimums in Virginia, and we have state attorneys who represent 40% of the state on board with repealing mandatory minimums. So that is a voice that we can bring to bear that we couldn't have 5 or 10 years ago. You have prosecutors saying, hey, politicians, don't give me this tool. I don't need it. I can keep my community safe without it. And so that's incredibly strong and valuable. So I think that movement has been successful. I want to give people, actually one quick thing, because we did get a couple real specific questions. A lot of people reach out to FAMM about getting in touch with lawmakers, or if they're having problems with their loved ones, and who should they call. Come to our site. There's tons of resources about, we can't handle everybody's problems, but we can try to equip you to become advocates for yourselves. And that means learning how to reach out to your lawmakers so that they can reach out to the Bureau of Prisons to check on cases, how to call the Inspector General's hotline because they're looking into prison conditions, especially during COVID. So we know how bad it is. And there's a lot of ways that you can weigh in to help and fight for your loved one. I know this is a really difficult time. So let's do a quick wrap up, parting thoughts, things that inspire people. Don't depress us here on the end. Let's talk about what we hope to achieve in 4 years. And I'll start with you, Nkechi.
All right. Thank you so very much, Kevin. I just want to say that the U.S. carceral system, we know it's ripe with racism and the like. It's impeded justice and equity for far too long. The police pandemic on top of a health pandemic. But I'm hoping that the recommendations that we have in our reports and that the ACLU, FAMM, and Prison Fellowship have will serve to help to transform the criminal punishment system so that it truly serves the interests of justice and human rights. And I'm glad to be part of this process and work in tandem with others.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Udi?
I'm gonna end with politics. Like I started with politics. I teach a class about the history of mass incarceration. And one of the things that we do is look at the two major parties' political platforms every 4 years and how they've changed on criminal justice issues. And it is amazing, right? You look at the 1994 Democratic Party platform. I'm sorry, 1996. Sorry, Democratic Party platform on criminal justice, and it was something straight out of like the Tough on Crime playbook, right? Where the Democratic Party, was celebrating the 3-strike law, celebrating expanding the death penalty, celebrating, locking up children. I mean, that was literally the narrative. And then look at, the most recent platform in 2020, right? Embracing ending mass incarceration, embracing racial justice. That didn't change because the Democratic Party suddenly one day woke up and found moral righteousness, right? It's many of the same people in leadership positions in the Democratic Party. What changed were the people, right? What changed were the political incentives. What changed were the politics. And the politics changed because of the people, not so much the 4 of us, but really the people who are watching this, right? It's those water cooler conversations. It's those Thanksgiving dinner conversations. It's that, grassroots activist who writes the letter to the editor in the local paper. It's the folks that show up in the middle of a pandemic, to what was the largest protest in American history. And that is this summer's Black Lives Matter movement. That's what changes. That's what gets a Biden to act. That's what gets a Harris to act. That's what gets a Chuck Schumer to act. And I'll remind people, Chuck Schumer, in his autobiography, criticized the ACLU for writing the nation's criminal justice reform laws. That is literally one of the, but now, we're working together. And it's okay. I'm not blaming Chuck Schumer. I'm not blaming, Joe Biden. We will work with everyone. A politician's job is to follow the politics. Our job is to create those politics. And that's what I'm hopeful about.
Thanks a lot. Heather?
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful note. We have a duty to create those politics. And I think the thing I find encouraging about today is just seeing all these different groups come together and to be able to work on these issues from different vantage points, but having shared goals. And, I am hopeful. And, I do want to I know FAMM, so many of the folks who watch this are people who have a loved one who's incarcerated. And so my prayers are with you all. And I also oversee our church mobilization departments at Prison Fellowship. And our largest program is Angel Tree. We would love to serve your loved one if they have children at home. Would encourage you to check that out. They can still sign up. We're still trying to make that operational as best we can during COVID-19. But there's some great programming there. And so I just want to give a shout out particularly to those advocates who are watching today who have a loved one who's incarcerated. I think it's just so powerful that you're using this moment to not just care for your loved one, but to be about something even bigger and greater and change. So thank you for that. And I hope that there's ways that we can all serve you and equip you in what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks. That's perfect. And that's really what I want to say is I think Udi's right. I mean, Congress just repealed the ban on eligibility for Pell Grants, which I know everybody supported. And if you look at who voted for that in 1994, some of those are the most progressive members of the United States Senate now. So the times changed, and they changed with them. And so that's the opportunity. And I think while the times have changed and people are more open to criminal justice, we have to make it a priority. I think that's what ACLU, Udi, I think that's what you all are trying to do, is to say, even if you're with us, you need to be with us now because we don't have time to wait. And that's a lot of what I get from our families, is the sense of urgency that it's great that you're with us and that you're not scared to vote against us like you might have been 30 years ago, but we need you to make this a priority, not just something you're willing to vote for. And so, I hope that's something all of us are committed to doing. And the families, thank you for being so active. I want to say something I always say, which is, please take care of yourselves during this time. We've been in this pandemic for so long. A lot of us have been shut up in our houses and suffering social isolation. And for you all to have the stress of worrying about a loved one and not hearing from them, I know how hard that is. And I just want to encourage you to take care of yourself while you advocate for others, because you're a better advocate when you do, and they need you strong on the outside. So please take care of yourselves while you're doing this work. And I just want to thank our guests. I knew I'd love having you here. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week or 2 weeks for another edition of the Heart to Heart series.